Just before getting into this episode, I'd like to ask a favour of all our listeners. What we'd like to do this year is do a project of people's favourite Bible characters. For regular listeners, you'll probably be aware that we like to ask our Christian guests who their favourite Bible character is. This time it's the turn of you, our listeners, to submit your favourite Bible character. Check out the show notes and see the link to anchor.fm/stillunbelievable/message. Click on that in any internet-enabled device and leave a brief message telling us who you are, a little bit about yourself, and then who your favourite Bible character is and why. It doesn't need to be a long message, and what we'll do is we'll compile those messages and put them into a separate episode later in the year. Hopefully we'll get some interesting results. Now, with that said, the episode you're about to hear is a Question a Christian session where Andrew and I are joined by Darren and David from Skeptics and Seekers, and we question 4 Christians, a question each, and we get the answers back. These are Christians who are thoughtful, engaging and honest, and I think that we all got on very well. So please enjoy the episode, and we will endeavour to have another one of these episodes as well later in the year featuring these questions, because I think we had a really good conversation. None of us went as far as we'd like to go, and we all left the recording session hungry for more of the same. So look out for more of this again in another episode later in the year. Thank you, and on with the show.
Hey, we've got an awesome edition for you today. We've got 2 ragtag teams here that are going to hash it out. So let's get ready to tumble. We've got on the left. We've got on the left. We've got Questioning Christianity. It's a podcast that talks to skeptics and so on. My friend Caleb Johnson, I got him through Facebook and asked him if he wanted to come on and get grilled. So he said, yeah, he's going to get his team together, and that's how it came about. Caleb.
I'm Caleb Johnston. We started Question Christianity a couple of years back. It started off as a local group for here in our regional area. We saw a need for some apologetics and some discussions that we didn't see happening within a lot of the churches in the area. So we started it as an effort to seek and speak to seekers and skeptics across the area and have open, honest discussions. And these 2 gentlemen here with me today are my co-host and the ones I started this with. Kev, I'll let you introduce yourself first.
I'm not sure why you brought me on the team, Caleb, but it's been fun. I'm teaching online intro to philosophy class as an adjunct at a college, and I've enjoyed seeing the interaction there with Christianity and other faiths. And yeah, I'm looking forward to our dialogue today. Thanks.
Charles Graves, and part of Reasonable Faith, chapter director for Roanoke, and glad to be on the team.
All right.
Awesome. Go ahead, David. I'll let you introduce your ragtag team.
I'm David the Skeptic, the heathen, not quite Satanist. I was too bad for them. Couldn't get in. But anyway, yeah, David Johnson, the other part of Skeptics and Seekers, and my team, the Pit Bulls, just 3 white guys hanging out. Me, and then there's, did I say 3 white guys? It's me and the other guys, Andrew, who does a plethora of podcasts. He and I like to bounce ideas.
Hello, kids.
So thank you, Andrew, for agreeing to come on. It wasn't really an agreement to come on. I told him that the show was going to happen and a little bit about it, and he was like, yeah, I'm in. There is Matthew, who is the Brit, also a well-considered person whose opinion I very much appreciate, and I also like to abuse from time to time because he's so good-natured. He brings it on himself. How you doing, Matt?
Groovy. Thanks for the command performance.
And then we've got Darren. So if you don't know Darren Lute, he is a harsh debater, softly spoken, but he's a very bad man. He is not someone that you want to get in a intellectual tangle with. And before he asks me to demonstrate that, I will just let him speak for himself. How you doing, Darren?
I'm doing good.
That's us. We've got a few questions.
I named this podcast Grill the Christian. David, I'll let you lead your band of skeptics to begin the questioning.
So I am going to start this off with Andrew. You're up.
Okay. So as a setup for the first question, I'm guessing the Christians, that each of you would support the idea of a non-physical God in the sense of classical matter and maybe even dark matter and dark energy. In other words, a God that lives outside of this universe and is non-material in that sense. So the first question then is, if you do in fact support that position, that there is a non-physical God from a classical perspective, how do you demonstrate that empirically, that there is a non-material, non-corporeal mind?
Maybe I'll start off and then I'll let Kevin and Caleb pop on. So one of the things that we as Christians believe in is revelation. Now that's a whole different dialogue, but God reveals himself as spirit. And so, of course, there'd be questions as to why we believe revelation to be true. Given the fact that I think we all believe that God's revelation of himself describes himself as spirit. So I think that's what we do. But your question was empirical evidence. Is that the term you used?
Yes, that's the heart of the question.
Okay. The first thing that comes to my mind is what I'm sure everyone is, well, maybe some are familiar with the Kalam cosmological argument. And so given the nature of our entire universe being physical, it seems to not be plausible that there's an infinite regress of physical events. That's whatever caused or created the universe has to be non-physical in nature. And so for me, that would be something non-physical. So I think that seems to be some type of empirical evidence for a non-physical creator.
Well, I'm just not sure how that counts as empirical evidence, because you've got a supposition that something immaterial has to cause the universe, but you don't have any demonstration that that supposition is actually true. And Andrew's question was specifically about empirical evidence, and I don't see how the Kalam argument counts as empirical evidence.
I want to try to distinguish between empirical and physical because they're not the same thing. Generally, empiricism is looking at experience, most typically sensory experience, but experience in general. So I think the Kalam is a combination of sensory experience observations about the universe as we experience it sensorially. So I'm not exactly sure why this doesn't get, it sounds like it doesn't get off the ground to you guys. So I'll need a little more help unpacking that, I think.
So before you take it, Matthew, I just want to refer to the questions. Darren, I think, was this your question about minds? How does God's mind?
Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Dave.
Well, no, if it's, I just don't remember. I didn't put down whose question was what, but
so I asked a question
up
about
to this.
minds preceding from minds, and Darren asked
Right.
a follow-up question about infinite regress in regard to that.
So
specific
let me just read that off because that kind of goes in this section. How does God's mind exist if minds can only come from other minds? Doesn't God having a mind demonstrate the phrase minds can only come from other minds is wrong? That seems to be a natural follow-up here.
Right.
So if one of you want to take that, and then we'll come back to Matthew.
I think one of the often misconceptions in this area is we're dealing a lot with the law of causality within the physical universe as we know it. We can't exactly say that the same rules of causality hold up outside of time, space, and matter as we know it, because we exist in a universe of time, space, and matter, and that's where our laws of causality come from. So to say that a mind can only come from another mind, I think is something we largely draw from our assumptions of the material universe rather than prior to this moment of the Big Bang.
As my last comment here, then, I will simply say that if you can demonstrate there are laws prior to the Big Bang, and you can somehow codify those laws in a way that demonstrates that there is some orderly progression to them, that there's a way to test them, to verify them, to work with them in some empirical way, If we can get there, then we have actually made it much further than this conversation ever gets for me.
I just wanted to feedback on what Caleb did just said, and it was very similar to what Andrew said, is certainly with what you said about the laws within our universe, yep, fine, I agree with that. The problem is when it gets to the comments about outside of our universe or outside of the Big Bang, or however you want to phrase that, I don't know how we can tap into any kind of knowledge of there being a mind in existence prior to the Big Bang, or whether even the phrase prior to the Big Bang makes any logical sense anyway. So I think that's where the problem is, and I don't know how to parse any kind of answer that includes that phrase.
Yeah, actually, I want to talk about that, because I think you're right to even bring up the questions like, can you even talk about before the Big Bang? Because, so my understanding is before, you can't really say before the Big Bang, so without the Big Bang or without the universe, nothing existed. So there was no thing, there was an absence of everything, and that would include laws. So the question about what type of laws would exist before the Big Bang or without the Big Bang, and the answer is there are no laws. There is no thing. There is no physical attribute. So all physical laws, all physical matter, energy, time, space, those things all were without existence.
That's not true.
No,
I'm
Well,
sorry.
okay.
I can't.
Sure.
I just can't let you finish that. That may be true in one type of cosmological model if you assume
Actually, it's not true in any cosmological model.
Yeah, if you assume that this instantiation of space-time, life, matter, energy is the only instantiation, maybe you would have a point, but you can't show that this universe did not bang or exude from another universe, which is also a cosmological model that some experts noodle as a possibility. And so you're just making an assumption that
I'm not making an assumption. So my understanding of current cosmological models is that if one universe did spring, and we'd have to talk about the different methodologies of how that happens, but if one universe did spring from another one, you still maintain the level of entropy, and so there is not a possible infinite regress back in time. So there is no current physics that would describe a method for one universe to pop in from another one, but even if there was, you still have the problem of the third law of thermodynamics. So there's going to be a specified number, which means you're going to get back to an original beginning. There's going to be an original instantiation.
Not necessarily.
Let me just say that Matthew and I had the opportunity to get the official reporter for the Royal Astronomical Society to come on to Proscenium about 6 weeks ago now. His name is Phil Hopper. We did an entire episode on cosmological models. I would encourage everyone listening, if you want to understand what the current state of cosmology is, and if you want to understand what cosmologists are actually thinking, this is the guy, Phil Hopper, that is engaged with cosmology in the modern sense. He is the person that does reporting for the Royal Astronomical Society. And what is being represented here, the idea that there is some entropy that can't proceed from one universe to the other, don't pay attention to us. None of us are cosmologists. But there is a show to understand this, and David is absolutely right. It is not the case that cosmology has been properly represented in the sense that if one universe proceeded from another, that's not possible in some infinite regress sense. Go listen to that episode over on Proscenium. It is dealt with in a professional way.
Yeah, and if anyone wants to really dig deep into this subject, there's a YouTube channel called PBS Spacetime, and they go over a lot of the cosmology. And for none of the popular cosmological models at the moment have the philosophers nothing before the universe. It's always some sort of quantum vacuum these days.
Yeah,
well, it's not really nothing, is it?
This idea that this is the only instantiation, there couldn't have been anything before it, is a particularly generous cosmology that Christians like to use because it helps to support their theory. And they tend to want to be deaf to all other cosmological theories. And I would just echo with Darren and other listeners. If you care about the subject of cosmology, it will not take very much research to realize that the Christian story is not the end all to the cosmological picture. In fact, it's I don't even think it's the dominant view.
So do you guys not believe in an initial singularity?
Well, there's a difference between the beginning of the expansion of the universe and the beginning of the universe from nothing. And when you get things like the Borde-Guth-Vilenkin, the theorem, Vilenkin, Guth, and I think Borde as well, all have said that the BVG is evidence of the beginning of the expansion of the universe, not the beginning of the universe itself. There is a difference between having a singularity where there's nothing before it and having a singularity that existed and then started to expand.
I think
the singularity is not the proper way to talk about it these days.
Right. And a singularity is not nothing. So if we're going to put a fine point on this somewhere, it should be that a singularity is not nothing.
Yeah, I don't know who you guys been reading.
Apparently more
actually,
than
hold
the
on.
guys you've been reading.
Absolutely not.
I
study this stuff on a daily basis.
Just so you know.
I study this stuff. Well, that's why I go to Aaron Wall and I go to people like Sean Carroll and I go to people like Lawrence Krauss even on some issues that I like.
So if you're not familiar with other cosmological theories,
I really am. I know the difference between different cosmological models. I know the Carroll Chin model. I know that Wire-Grayton model, and all of them fail. And you know what? There's a huge divide in the cosmological argument.
You said they all fail.
They argue. No, I did not. I did not. I said they all argue. I said they all argue with each other.
Okay, go back and listen. And you use the word fail. I'm not interested in debating whether you use the word fail or not. What I'm interested in getting you to do is to defend the position that they all don't work.
Yeah, well, I mean, if you guys want to interrupt and let me finish talking, then that would be fine.
Hey, I'm just grilling you, dude.
Yeah, that's not grilling. You're supposed to grill me after I speak. No,
I'll do that too.
All these guys argue with each other, and if you look at the dialogues on the boards on the between Wall and Carroll, you see these guys arguing all the time.
It just means that there are a number of viable models.
There's I don't think they're viable. I think that even Sean Carroll.
So you do think they all fail?
Even Sean Carroll said his is not. They're not even close to finding the answer yet.
I like Sean Carroll. I don't think Sean Carroll's God.
Yeah, but
What?
You go off
What is that?
All right. Anyways, let's give the Christians actually a chance to respond.
Right. What the Christians are saying is there's only one way to look at this, and this is the.
No, that's not what we're saying. I'm not saying that this is the only way.
That's what you assume,
on
David.
their listeners, and it's not true.
But David, that's what you're assuming.
I acknowledge that the Christian model is one model.
Christian model.
The model that Christians like to use because it's friendly to their position. I acknowledge that that's one model, that's a possibility. But there are others that answer their questions. And what they should say, if they're being honest, is this is one possible model. There are other models. It's still an open question, but they don't say that.
Yeah,
okay, so what we're saying is I acknowledge that there are several, there's more than several, there's many models. There are some that have been largely put to bed. There are some that are still open to debate. But what we're not arguing for the Christian model, we're arguing for the standard model, the standard cosmological model. This is the, by and large, to my understanding, the current most well-established by empirical evidence model of the universe. It's not
the standard model doesn't include that a mind did it. So that's
right.
not actually
that's
what you're
right.
arguing.
You're right. The standard model does not say that a mind did it. The standard model says that the universe has a finite beginning that begins with a singularity.
Actually, it says that the universe has a finite beginning to the expansion of the universe.
That is correct.
Right.
So what then was before? You can't have an infinite regress.
Well, no, we're not
that's something you would have to prove. Hold on. Infinite regress is something that has to be proven. That's and even in the model that would be proposed by a mind creating the universe, and I'm not going to use something as inflammatory as the Christian model. So not trying to create some sort of disenchantment with the conversation, but the idea that there must have been some mind to do it doesn't get away from the infinite regress problem.
Well, and you have to
I
first
suspect
demonstrate that the infinite regress actually is a problem.
Yeah, I suspect that
that's true, and I think we can demonstrate that.
I've yet to find any Christian able to demonstrate the infinite regress is an actual problem.
Okay. All right. Well, let's let them respond to that. But guys, we're gonna have to move on. Charles, since you started it, I'll let you lead out, and then follow up. Everybody else follow up. I mean, say your last piece on the cosmological, and I'll let you guys conclude on the cosmological.
If I remember, it was there has not been a Christian to demonstrate the impossibility or with the possibility of an infinite regress.
Yeah.
That it's actually a problem.
That it's actually a problem, and in relation only to the beginning of, or I guess you would put it, the initial inflation or the beginnings of universes.
Sure.
Okay.
In relation to the cosmological argument, how it's normally used there.
Would these include a single timeline? The problem, so I'll just try to answer it. The problem that I have with an infinite regress is the fact that it is a theory of an actual infinite number of things. So, and I don't think that it's possible to have an actual infinite number of things, which this would include. This is not a potential infinite. You're speaking about an actual infinite regress, right? Because we're talking about this universe that is here. And so if it's here now, then it's an actual thing, and anything that came before it and before it and before it would be an actual infinite collection. I don't think that, I think it's been well philosophically demonstrated that you can't have an actual infinite number of things, including beginnings of universes. And we're talking Hilbert's Hotel and things like that.
Yeah, so I'm willing to let Darren just kind of wrap that up and go to the next question. We've got a lot to cover.
Yeah, the biggest problem is if you accept general relativity, then there is no infinite regress problem because there was no time t where the universe didn't exist and then began to exist. So it's one of those things that you have to demonstrate that it's actually a problem, and things like the Hilbert Hotel don't actually demonstrate that it's a problem because the Hilbert Hotel isn't accurately reflecting what an actual infinite would be or how you interact with one. But anyways, so you want me to go to my question? I don't know if I've got these in the right order. And just for the Christians that are listening, I don't really care about opinions or how you feel or what you believe or anything like that. I'm really more interested in what you can actually demonstrate to be true. So just keep that in mind when you're...
I like that. Actually, I like that.
Yeah, just keep that in mind while you're composing your responses.
Okay.
If I ask someone to demonstrate that electricity is a real thing, they can produce it and I can touch it and verify it as real. If I ask someone to demonstrate that dark energy is real, even though we don't know what it is or how it works, we can point to the physical results of it affecting the universe. For example, we can do the distance measurements, we can measure the large scale wave patterns of mass density of the universe, etc. It may be that it's has something to do with gravity, an unknown aspect of gravity we don't know, but we know it exists because it's actually affecting the universe and we can measure that. Dark matter is sort of the same way. We don't really know what it is, but if I ask someone to demonstrate it, they can point to real physical results that exist in the universe. We can weigh the universe, we can observe gravitational lensing, we can observe the cosmic microwave background, and all of this demonstrates that whatever dark matter is, it's a real thing and it actually exists. So how do you demonstrate that the soul is a real thing?
So your question was, I like the idea of this comparison to dark matter. So although we can't directly observe dark matter, we can observe its effect on things.
Yeah, we can measure its effects on things.
Sure, measure.
And we know that it's actually something that we don't know what's going on. So how do we demonstrate that the soul is a real thing?
I don't think we would approach the demonstration precisely the same way we would try to demonstrate something physical about the universe. It's rational to want a demonstration of some sort, but it's going to be more along rationalist lines probably, even though it will also refer to experience, not sensory experience. That's sort of a preamble, getting warmed up.
I understand. I had to do the same thing.
Yeah.
Right. So I really liked your dark matter example of what you're looking for.
And that's just an example. If you have
Sure.
some other...
No, I like that.
Yeah, no, I'm not sure that a demonstration of mind, which I'll say that instead of soul, could be exactly parallel to that sort of demonstration, because by its mind we mean something non-physical, right? But probably experiential. I think it's probably why you started out saying, I don't care about what you feel. That makes me want to distinguish between mere emotive reaction, feeling in that sense.
Right, but we know what feelings are, right?
Yeah,
They're
versus
chemical processes in the brain, so we know what those are.
Okay, well, they may accompany those one way or the other, right?
The interesting thing here is, I think by definition, when we talk about spirit or mind, well, you guys would probably disagree with mine, but I think you said spirit.
Soul.
Darren, is that right? Soul.
I said soul.
Okay.
If you want to conflate that with spirit and mind, that's fine.
No, that's cool. I like soul. Soul is good. I think by definition, when we talk about a soul, we're talking about something that's non-physical, and so I'm wondering if this is a category problem. So you're asking for, it seems like you're asking for empirical physical evidence for something that's non-physical, and
Not
then
really.
Okay.
No, because I mean, for example, in your estimation, what does a soul do? What is a soul?
The soul is the essence of mind or person.
Okay, so what does it do?
I think it's who I am.
Can you expand on that a little bit?
Maybe not, actually.
What does it do? Does it affect our feelings? Does it allow us to have thoughts, that, cognitive ability? What does it do? Memories?
Yeah, so I think that the soul is the essence of personhood and mind, and that so of course Christians are dualists, so we believe in the physical body and also the soul or spirit, and those things are in combination with each other. I understand your position, I think, you can correct me if I'm wrong, which is everything that we feel or experience and our thoughts can all be attributed to some type of physical environment in like our actual brain, like chemicals and stuff like that. And I think
we don't need to get ahead of ourselves too much. I'm still trying to figure out what does the soul do? Does it store memories? Does it affect our actions? Does it hold our personality? What exactly are we talking about when we say soul? Or when you say soul?
Well, I'll let the other people chime in, but I think I'm going to stick with my answer that it's the essence of my personhood. It's my, I guess, personality, thoughts, being.
So it affects your actions, right?
Sure, absolutely.
So when we have the body, because we know the body is a electrochemical machine. In order to move your arm, you have to have electrical chemicals come from your brain down your arm, and you move all your stuff that way, right?
Yep.
Knowing that the body is an electrochemical machine, then if you've got a soul that's telling the body to do something, then we have to have electricity or chemicals coming from the soul in order to tell the body what to do, right?
Yeah. So metaphors are always suspect, but the best I can come up with a metaphor to kind of answer what you're going towards is a person playing a piano. If we visualize the person as the soul in this metaphor and the piano as the body, the soul is the primary impetus for action, as we talk.
Right, but even in that metaphor, you've got a person hitting down the keys on the piano, right?
Right. So what if the piano is untuned or some of the keys are broken? So we can certainly measure the action of the piano keys being pushed and they're making the sound. We just think there's something before that is causing that, or that can interrupt that flow. So if someone has physical handicaps,
so if we're going to take that as a hypothesis, then what would we expect to see in the body if a soul actually existed?
I don't think we expect to see anything in a body.
Well, the soul's interacting with the body, right?
Sure. Okay. Interaction. Yeah.
So you have to have some sort of transition point from the soul to the body at some point, right? There's got to be some sort of translation between the whatever you're calling the non-material and the material, right?
Yeah, the old dualistic interaction problem, right?
Right. So what if, under your hypothesis of the soul, what would we expect to actually see in the body? Just off the top of my head, I would think we would see electricity and chemicals coming into existence out of what we would think of as nothing, right?
I don't see how that follows.
Well, because the soul has to communicate with the body, right? And the only language the body knows is chemicals and electricity.
I think the communication would be different than the causation of the emergence of electricity or chemicals on occasions.
I have no clue how you get there. Because if you were going to move your arm and it's the soul that's the beginning of the impetus to move your arm, the whatever impetus of the soul has to be converted into electricity at some point to move the arm. So there has to be a transition there somewhere.
What occasions? So you said on occasion it would be. Can I ask on what occasions? Since it seems like
I just meant
you've created two categories: one where there wouldn't be an occasion, one where there would.
I meant instance at each instance. I'm sorry.
Fair enough. No, it's fair enough.
Let me move it along to Matthew, who is hiding or sleeping. Matthew, you have been around as long as Darren when we've had Dale talk about this. I bet you've probably listened to some of Dale's
a while ago, but yes, I did.
Stuff on this. Shout out to Dale Glover, is my former SNS partner. He's now gone full academic, but he has done a lot of work on the whole mind-body interaction problem. And so, in all fairness, I would say that while the three gentlemen here may be having some trouble putting that into words, it's a tough problem. There are ways to talk about it. I don't know them. I mean, I've listened to Dale too. I can't repeat back his thoughts in this way. His thoughts are higher than my thoughts. But just being as generous as I can, there are ways to answer this sort of that I don't fully understand. So Matthew, having walked through that swamp a little bit, maybe you can ask Darren's question or follow up in a slightly different way so that we can elicit maybe a different response, because it sounds like we're just kind of stuck there.
Yeah, I have got a different way of asking the same question, but just to set the scene, I largely agree with Darren. Darren's not said anything that I quibble with at all.
So do I. I have had this same conversation with Dale, and the difference is Dale has said many academic things, but I just keep going back to the same things because it doesn't make any sense to me.
I was unable to boil out anything that I could hold on to from the things that Dale said. We have, under naturalism, explanations for everything that makes us human, and it's in the brain, whether it's genetics, whether it's chemical reaction, or a combination of the two. It's explained one way or another, from whether we like tomatoes to what our favorite movie is, to whether we like sports or whether we prefer motorsports, that kind of thing. We can work that out, and ditto with memories. So if we can do that, but as you guys are suggesting, there is something else that is which is encapsulated in, let's call it, a soul. But I think Darren touched on that. What is it that's stored in the soul? Because at the moment we've got a whole load of human explanations which are entirely within the brain. So if we've got it all entirely within the brain, why is it necessary? What extra does a soul add? Because it seems to me that positing a soul on top of that adds an extra layer of unnecessary complication. And if I can't tell the difference between me without a soul and me with a soul, then what's the point in saying there's a soul? Because it adds murkiness, which is unnecessary, if that makes any sense.
It's kind of an Occam's razor type of
guys.
Yeah.
issue.
Let me do what David Johnson did about the sleeping Matthew and get the sleepy Caleb over here to my homie over here to give his thoughts on this. I see him stewing over there, and I'm like, I know he wants to say something, but we keep cutting him short. So go ahead, Dave. Caleb, go ahead.
Yeah, so Charles and Kevin are really more experienced in this area of thought than I am. But offhand, I would say that what is added is when we look at human beings, we have everything we can see. But we know that there are aspects of human beings that go far beyond what we can see. So if somebody else was controlling your wife's body, it's clearly not her. If we had a way to make robots out of people, we would know that there is a difference, because a person is a combination of their experiences, their memories. The way they handle any given situation is different than you or I would. So I think from our observations and interactions with people, we can tell that there are non-physical aspects to people. And if that's the case, in reality, regardless of our kind of discussion here, we would expect there to be examples within reality where there is possibly a disconnect between the soul and the body. And just to pull in one example here of that is near-death experiences.
Exactly.
You could write them off as hallucinations, but there are some with empirically verifiable facts. We have accounts of near-death experiences where people learned information that otherwise they wouldn't be able to know. So it shows a disconnect between the soul and the body. I'm not sure that really answers your question, Matthew, but that's kind of some of my thought process on this conversation right now.
And let's get Charles. You want to take it from there and answer?
No, I'm really glad Caleb brought up the NDE, because that was going to be one of my final points, because he did ask for some type of empirical evidence, and I think that's at least an interesting route to go to maybe start to answer that. And then as I've been thinking about this question, what is the soul? Maybe a better answer is our consciousness. And so I think that both on the physical, materialistic side, no one really knows what the consciousness is. So I think there's a problem on that side as well. I don't know. That would be a good question. What is consciousness if it's not the soul?
So let me, I think I'm probably the only one who hasn't weighed in on this yet, besides you, Russell. Right.
I just wanted to follow up real quick, David, before you actually weigh in, because I do want to address Darren's point. Where is the transfer and when would we see it? I mean, that's a good question. I think we should be able to explore a little deeply. Where do you think that comes in at? Was I getting you right there, Darren, on that?
Well, yeah, I mean, because my question was, how do you demonstrate that the soul is a real thing? I mean, it seems like the easiest way to do that would be to find where the soul interacts with the body and say, hey, look, there's these chemicals and electricity that are coming from what we can tell is absolutely nothing, breaking the second law of thermodynamics. I mean, that would be incredible if we found something like that, right? That would be like proof positive that there's something going on there that we don't really know what's going on. And if it's just popping out into existence out of nowhere, then we know that there exists something there that's actually controlling our bodies.
Kind of like, yeah, just like to put it simply, because I think, we look at it in a very deep light. Where's that interface, so to speak? Where's the interface come in at?
And if we don't find an interface, isn't that evidence that there is no soul?
That there's no physical interface is what you're wanting to know.
Yeah.
Well, the body only talks physical. So if you want the soul to tell your arm to move, and your arm only moves because of physical electrical chemicals, then the soul has to talk physical at some point.
So this is question 2. We have many. Even this isn't the most interesting.
Can I at least get a shout out from Darren to say that we didn't answer this with the word feelings in there?
So
am I frozen or is everyone else frozen?
I do just want to throw in one point there, and I don't mind if someone responds to it. I don't want to be the guy who comes in and just drops a load and then moves on. If you could add this to whatever response you're going to conclude with, NDEs are problematic both theologically and physically. Theologically, we're told that it is appointed man wants to die, and after this, a judgment. And death in the Bible is
near-death experience, not death experience.
Excuse me. Death in the Bible is described as the soul parting the body. And so if you say, well, in an NDE, the soul is parted the body, then that's not near death at all. That's death, biblically speaking. Theologically, that doesn't work. Physiologically, it's also problematic, because if you say that with some of these experiments, the soul the person has this feeling of leaving their body, and then they can look down and see themselves, and they can see, playing cards and, above lights, and they can float around, go to different buildings and look at the windows, these sorts of things. And what you're saying is the soul has eyes, which would be physical light sensors picking up light, and it has the ability to interact with things. You're ascribing a kind of a physicality to a thing that is supposedly non-physical. So if a soul can do all that, then we should be able to detect it. NDEs don't work as a solution for the soul on any level.
We did some formal studies of NDEs, particularly in the UK. This was, Matthew, you might remember this better than I do, but this was actually done in ERs and operating rooms where people might die on the table, and they took a card and put it up on a high shelf where it wasn't visible from the floor, but it was visible from the perspective of someone who should be floating outside their body. And there was no result in which an out-of-death experience produced anyone being able to say what was on those cards. And if that doesn't trouble you about NDEs, it should.
Let's let
trouble
the
me.
Christians. Yeah, let's let the Christians.
Should.
I'll save my other observations.
So for that, I mean, we've got. We do actually have it in the opposite too, Andrew. But I do want to give the Christians a chance to answer it and kind of wrap it up on their end. I want to start. I know there's so many questions there. It's a theological problem, so forth. So let's let FedEx answer, since he's still in his FedEx uniform.
I hope I can deliver. Yeah. Right. Let me back up just a little bit. A lot has been covered. So first of all, I'm not satisfied with reducing all of our experiences to chemistry and electricity, which are and have physical properties. I'm wondering if the skeptical position is that there aren't actually thoughts, or of course where I'm going with is rationality, but I don't know where to. So many things on the table here. I don't think we're going to be able to ever reduce rationality to physical properties that have dimension, take space, mass, and so forth. And if we don't, and if everything does reduce simply to that, then we don't have any basis for claiming rationality. Maybe we'll get into that later. As for NDEs, I'm not sure why they're a physical problem. Earlier, we were asked to show the soul. We were asked to expect that the soul should have an interface with the physical world. But then David says that if that itself is a problem. Not sure why, if the soul exists, it would have this capacity to interface.
If it exists in the way that people talk about, and it has eyes and it can move around and things like that, it has physical properties that we should be able to see. Cannot explain then how this non-physical thing can see things and hear things.
Yes, we can.
So that is physical problem that you're compiling on a soul.
Okay, so we're already taking the position where we believe that the physical body, in some way that admittedly we haven't described yet, is interfacing with the soul. So there's information being passed. So if my eyes see something, yes, it's my eyes that are physically perceiving the light that's entering my eyeballs and transmitting electrical signals, but somehow that's getting back to my soul, and it's my soul, my consciousness, that's making decisions. So if the soul was detached from the body,
if the soul is hovering over a hospital bed, I'm sorry, and you're seeing yourself, the only eyes are in the you that's unconscious on the bed.
Right,
so
I'm just saying that
are you saying that the eyes are communicating remote control to the soul, and then then it makes no sense. It is a physical problem. It's logically incoherent.
You're saying that there's an assumption there that the only way that a consciousness could perceive things that exist in the world would be through some physical thing. And we're talking about a non-physical spirit who could perceive things non-physically.
Well, if it can see physical things, then it is receiving light.
Perceive. I didn't say see, I said perceive.
You're begging the question, David.
I'm begging for something coherent.
You said that if it can see, it requires physical apparatus, but that assumes naturalism. That's what we're talking about.
Well, but actually, aren't you just being asked to demonstrate that there is something non-physical? Aren't you just being asked
you're going to only accept physical demonstrations? It's like, show to us.
Hold on. That's not actually. Look,
so this is your example.
Wait a minute. I have made absolutely zero claim in this part of the conversation that only the physical exists.
Okay.
What you're being asked to do, quite plainly, is to demonstrate that the non-physical exists in the same way that the physical does. Now maybe you'd say, well, I don't accept that the physical exists. Okay, well, we don't really have a starting point then. But you do accept that the physical exists. At least I presume that you do. Sorry if that's a misstatement of your position. But in a similar way, you're being asked to demonstrate that we should accept the non-physical in the way that you accept the physical. That doesn't seem to be some sort of apparition in conversation. It seems to be quite a reasonable request.
Yeah, I think we got derailed a lot from the original question, and I agree with you. It's reasonable to ask.
If you'd like to remove the NDE off the table, you can get back to the original question, because that's utter nonsense. And you're just kind of floating some initials out there, this near-death idea, as if that explained something. And when you take it apart and look at what it is supposed to explain, it just ends up being utter incoherent nonsense.
I don't believe that.
And I'm calling it out for that.
You're stating it,
let
but
them,
you're not showing
let
it.
them answer it. Let them answer it.
Do you want us to take it off the table or answer your claim that it's incoherent nonsense?
Yeah, but look, it's on the table. You can either answer the claim or just say you can't answer the claim. We can take it off and look at some other avenue.
I do have a question later on that deals more along with non-material supernatural. So if we want to put a pin in it and wait until that question.
All right. Well, let me go back to the original very briefly. I would say generally the Christian view is our inner experiences, which aren't the same thing as feelings, suggest that we have a rational sense and a moral sense. That's really broad, but that's just a starting point for our discussion, if you will, that gets closer to your original question. So it's empirical in that it's experience. However, it's inner experience, unless we're talking about minds relating to other minds, which makes it more objective. That's a very rough starting point answer to why Christians believe something like that.
Right, but aren't you begging the question at that point? Because you're assuming that the soul is a real thing and this mind points to it. So how do you demonstrate that supposition you're making initially, that the mind points to it, is actually pointing to a soul?
I'm sorry.
Just to piggyback on what Darren said there, my other question was going to be, isn't this just a case that the Bible said so? So you have to believe there's a soul, and so you're working from there to come up with some philosophical structure to support that.
I'm not sure our personal motives may or may not be on either side here, but let's just go back to.
It's not really personal motives that I'm asking about so much as, look, let me get this out. It's not as much personal motives. I'm not impugning motives. My thought is that if you don't have the Bible saying that you have a soul, we don't seem to have in science or other means something saying that we have that. You kind of need that presupposition to get it going. Otherwise, you would be able to explain, well, in the experiment of 1862, they found blank, and we started asking, well, what could that possibly be? But that's not how we're answering the question.
Well, I would answer the question differently than you suggest I would. And that is the notion of non-material soul is a very ancient philosophical concept, argued for by people who didn't even know what a Bible was, Platonic or pre-Socratic even. So I just don't like that you're assuming that no one could rationally conceive of and defend the notion of immaterial selfhood.
I will grant that. That was a sloppy suggestion on my part. If I cleaned it up a little bit, I would say that it seems religiously motivated as opposed to empirically motivated. So yes, it has been around in philosophy for a long time, but so has belief in any number of gods and animism and that sort of thing. So I'm trying to get you to explain the soul. I think that where the heart of the question is to explain the soul without regress to that type of animistic thinking and explain in the way that you would explain to a scientist or a doctor why they should believe that there is a soul. And that's the answer that I'm just not hearing from anyone on the panel.
It's fine that if you want to say that a lot of people used to believe it, but my question was, how do you demonstrate the soul is a real thing? And I don't think pointing to a lot of people who believe it actually demonstrates that what they're believing is accurate.
Sure. I went there because I thought the objection was that only Bible believers would come up with an idea. So on the other hand, going back to Plato or so forth, Aristotle, this idea of something immaterial about ourselves and even about other reality outside of ourselves seems to have a rational lineage. And I'm not sure how the arguments are much worse, even if we know more about neurobiology now, which is just to say we know more about the body now than before. So Plato argues for the concept of justice being a real thing, not just our experiences of instances of things that we think are just. And there's some sort of rationalist lineage that also takes on empirical form with Aristotle. It's not completely, I don't think it's religious at all at that point.
Well, neither is chi, for that matter. But it's the same kind of thing.
I think if you're looking for actual demonstrations or evidence, I'm still going to bring the NDEs back on the table. I think it's still a good argument. I don't have a problem with some experiment or whatever that was done where they placed a card on top of a table. That's just because it didn't happen then does not necessarily mean that it didn't happen in other instances. That seems like a non sequitur to me. The evidence for NDEs does seem to be fairly convincing. We have instances where people have learned and known things. Whatever else you might have an objective to theologically, which I do think there's an answer to that. If people can learn things that they couldn't have otherwise learned, and this has been documented and demonstrated, it's like the soul seems like the best rational answer to that.
My final response here would be a question in essence, so don't feel like you have to answer, but the question to people in this situation would be, do you believe that any individual you interact with, whether it be your wife, your mother, your children, are merely and exclusively only the chemical, mechanical behaviors within their body? Is that all that makes them up? And is that the only thing that can possibly be within a given individual? That's the question I would leave people with.
I think David, the question is facile. Yeah, but okay.
Yeah, but merely can I just say merely, exclusively, only, chemical, physical? When you say chemical and physical, and then you try to combine that with merely, exclusively, only, you are suggesting that that physical and chemical processes are somehow incredibly simple by tagging them with merely, exclusively, only. Maybe that wasn't what you were trying to do, but it rings very false to me.
He believes that there has to be something more. There just has to be. Can't you feel it? Can't you feel that there must be something more?
I never said feeling. We never said that. For the record, you were the first one to say that, and it's a false accusation.
Okay, so you mind if I?
Does that mean
you mind if I wrap up my question real quick?
Well, we already got the final response there.
Yeah, we're gonna have to go on to Matt. We'll get another round of questions. Consider this a practice round. We'll do better the next time. Matt.
Oh, crumbs. Every question so far has gone, I need to do a full show on this.
I know, right? Maybe we should. Maybe we should document this down.
We should.
I wouldn't mind having this session once a month. So
I'm game for that. But if this goes on for too long, I'm going to have to go downstairs and grab my evening meal and eat in front of you. Andrew plugged our Proscenium podcast in the last one, and we've also done a Proscenium podcast on consciousness with the wonderful Professor Philip Goff. So go and listen to that. And I also want to say congratulations on answering that question, and nobody dropped the free will bomb. I've got several questions built in. It's on miracles, my question. I've written several sentences here, and there's several questions in there. So I'll read it through, and if you want to break it down afterwards, then by all means pick out what's most interesting to you. Yeah. So many Christians accept and believe that their God performs miracles today. Some even have examples that they can point to as such a miracle. Yet those very same Christians tend to be reluctant to test their God's miracle ability in a controlled environment. Why is that? And if you are a Christian who believes in miracles today, would you be prepared to put your belief to a test in a controlled environment? And then finally, even if you don't believe in miracles today, do you believe that the miracles in the gospel happened as described, and why?
Wow, that's a large question, Matthew.
Yeah, I acknowledge that. I acknowledge that. It'll be a miracle if we can get through it in 10 minutes.
It's a good start.
We did a miracle show on SNS that was I want to say 7 parts.
Wow.
So we're gonna run through this in 15 minutes. Go for it.
Okay, well that's a big one. Is there one you want us to hit first? Subpart A, subpart
pick
B.
What you want.
Yeah. Whichever tickles you the most is what I'm happy with.
I'll start off just because I'm the loudmouth here. Let me take the one where you said, would I be willing to test in a controlled environment? And my answer to that is actually no. I think that comes along the line, if you look at the gospel accounts of Jesus being tempted, one of the temptations was throw yourself off of the building because his angels will catch you. And the answer to that was, you shall not put your Lord God to the test. To me, it would be a sin to try to do that. It's like, I'm not going to test God because I'm told not to. Does he still perform miracles? Yes. Yeah. Well, is it convenient or is it commanded? There's a special place for miracles, but I'll let someone else jump in.
I'm going to jump in right there, Charles, because I think part of it is there's a misunderstanding of what a Christian view of miracles are. It is not simply a genie in the bottle type thing of God does this to help this person or that. It's also a divine act of communication. So the miracles we see within the Bible, and I think if you look at modern examples of miracles as well, you see a lot of them occur in parts of the world where Christianity hasn't spread yet. It's a divine act of communication that is not merely for the actual miracle that occurs, but they have a purpose in communicating from the divine.
Well, okay, if I could follow up with Matthew's question, just to maybe it's a piece that you can springboard to some of those other aspects. Is there a way to determine after the fact that something was actually a miracle? So if you say you can't put him to the test and then have him do a miracle, can you look at an event and say 100% certain that he did a miracle?
We're really going to need to make sure we're talking about the difference between miracles and providence before we answer that.
Well, whatever you think miracle is, can you answer that question? I don't want to get too involved in definitions. We did a whole show for about 2 hours and we still couldn't define it. So that said, whatever you think a miracle is, can you answer that question? Can you positively 100% identify a miracle after the fact?
I could fine tune that just a little bit. I think.
Sure. In the statement that I'm responding to, he said that miracles often take place in other countries. So I assume that you believe that miracles are happening and that you would be able to identify events that were miracles. If you can't, then I don't understand what you mean.
Well, he's thinking about that.
I have that effect
with your standard. So your standard was 100%, and then you added some more adjectives there. It's like,
right.
Yeah.
Can we not just say that there's a more rational reason to believe that it was a miracle than that there wasn't? The predominance of the evidence. Why does it have to be 100% to your standard?
Well, because you just said with extreme confidence that it happened. And so when I go back, if you say my grandmother was healed from cancer and it's a miracle, praise God. Well, you've just praised God for a thing. You're declaring a great deal of certainty that God did something. So if I ask you, okay, can you say 100% that God did it? Can you point that out to me and show me in a way that I could believe it, that that's a miracle? You either can or you can't. And if you can't, then I'm not entirely sure on what basis you call it a miracle other than emotion.
How about at least this methodology for trying to make that determination, which is when we look at an event that happened, that we see that there seems to be more evidence that it happened non-naturally.
How do you conclude that?
Yeah. I think the key word was,
we know what
The key word
nature
was when
is
you
able
said,
to do and what it's not. And so if
That
this
that
seems like
seems
something,
that seems like a. Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to run over you. There
no,
was
go ahead.
a slight delay. No, look, I really don't want to run over you. I did that to
Right.
Russell earlier. and he was
From my
calling me
part,
out on
it's you can't call down a miracle
Hold down.
before it happens, and you can't identify one after it happens, but you're willing to stake your reputation that it happens.
Oh, I'm
And
not
it
saying we
seems to
can't
me,
identify.
it seems to me that when a skeptic asks a Christian more details about a miracle, you can't get one to happen, and you can't identify one that has happened, but somehow it just happens, and we can't talk about it more specifically than that.
Can we let the Christian answer that?
Yeah, I just want to understand what I'm saying.
I understand now. I understand the dilemma that you propose. It's very helpful, actually, that you stated it out on both ends. So let me back up and only speak for myself, because I'm not exactly sure what my friends would say about miracles now. I'm actually generally highly skeptical of modern day miracle claims. All right, I'll just put that out. I might have to talk about this for just a minute so you understand where I'm coming from, and then I'm not sure how it'll fit ultimately. I'm very reluctant to immediately give credence to modern day miracle claims by Christians. That's probably partly related to my repulsion to most of Western American Christian televangelism and miracle healing crusade type prosperity pimps. Now we might get on a whole new topic there.
We could find some agreement, I think, with everyone here.
We might actually have one thing that most of us would agree on, that most of these guys are fraudulent religious.
Well, I think we'd say all of them.
Okay.
We're trying to make a connection here, Andrew.
Come on, give me
I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I feel the mental connection.
Okay, a little bit.
Andrew, you're
that might be the most
today. I get to be the jerk. So,
but let me continue. So, and I also will give you guys even more than you asked for. Maybe a lot of healing experiences are very likely psychosomatic. We do know more about that sort of mind-body interaction, if you will, allow that phrase, than in the past. That with magnetic speaker, charismatic speakers and all these sorts of things probably accounts for a lot. I just want to let you know where I was coming from. I'm not, the modern day miracle guy.
I appreciate that.
Okay. So from there, you say we can't call them down. I agree with you. I'll give you that also, because in my theological framework, we don't call down miracles. I don't see that happening in the biblically generally either. That this is God's sovereign choice. Caleb spoke to a little bit about what some of the purpose of that may often be. So you're right. I can't and wouldn't like for someone else to claim that they could call down a miracle now. Yeah. As far as that goes, after the fact, it's then just going to move into probability, and the problem with that is, the most likely explanation. But the problem with that is your one phrase: can you demonstrate it to my satisfaction? Different worldview framework is going to change what you expect out of probability, plausibility, and alternate explanations. So,
I could clarify that too.
Okay.
I don't mind the probability thing so much, but I think that I might be echoing Darren's thoughts here a little bit when I say, whenever it comes to these miracle claims, and I've looked into many. So I was a Christian for most of my life. So. And a preacher for most of that. So this is not unfamiliar stuff to me.
Hey, I was a non-believer.
That said, with all of these claims, pretty much all of them, there's always some body of evidence that we don't have. And so we can take the word and maybe they can show some documentation for some parts of the story, but there's always some holes. And when those things get thoroughly investigated, there's always some more stuff. that comes out that makes it, okay, maybe that wasn't quite the miracle we thought it was. So we are always dealing with very incomplete investigations when we're investigating things that happened in the past. And the further in the past we go, the harder it is to investigate. But I simply have no reason to believe that it was investigated any better then by people with fewer tools than we're able to investigate today. And we still can't investigate today to bring forth all of the evidence that it would take to say, okay, that's clearly a supernatural event. So that's what I mean by that. So I do believe in probability and things like that when we have all, or at least a lot of more of the information than we generally do with miracle.
There is a newer collection, and I'm not sure if any of you guys are familiar with Craig Keener's.
He was on the show. Craig Keener's big book of
read both volumes, volume 1 and volume 2.
So you're including that in what's
yes.
not persuasive to you. Okay.
Yes. Well, I could. I've read some follow up on some of the stories from that too. I've had extensive discussions with, once again, I invoke the name of Dale here, who is also very studious in this area, and I think that as you talk about some of the instances in particular, and you look at some of the other information that's come out, and some of the mitigating factor, it's you can shed doubt on even those stories because there's just information that those stories don't include and that can be investigated, and we just learn more that makes it all a little bit more doubtful. I won't say.
I need to ask a question there, Dave. It's really important to me here. If Keener's work, both volumes, if Keener's work is a work that is, from the Christian perspective, a legitimate study, not on the probability of prayer or the likelihood of miracles, but a convincing case, an actual study of what it means to have modern miracles. If this is a convincing case for Christians, then why would you argue against a more formal study where we ask for God to do whatever it is that God does to break the laws of reality? Because a person that asks for God, and in some testing sense, to break the laws of reality on their behalf, it doesn't mean that they don't actually need the thing done. So it's not as if when God intervenes for someone because they really need it, that is somehow in conflict with the idea that someone says, God, I can't believe unless you do this. And if God sees those things as mutually exclusive, well, then that's just a misunderstanding. But either way, if Keener's work is a legitimate study on miracles, then there should be no objection to a better formal study.
Well,
okay, sorry, I'm done.
Just to tag on, I think if we did it in the same sense of looking at accounts of miracles, diving in, studying as much of the evidence as possible, including pulling all the medical records we possibly can. If we're looking at a study that way, I 100% agree. I think a lot more should be done in that regard. The question is, if we're doing a study beforehand and trying to force a miracle, then we're missing some of the understanding of what a miracle actually is.
I don't think we are.
Yeah, I don't either.
Because if your argument is that a miracle is actually a thing that can't be studied in a formal sense, what you are actually saying is that a miracle is a thing that cannot be proven in a formal sense. And so I don't buy that just because it's a free will action by some agent that it can't be formally studied. That doesn't seem
I don't think that's our argument.
Yeah,
I would just like to add, I like Craig Keener. I would like to have another conversation with Craig Keener. He's one of my favorite Christian apologists. And so I have no axe to grind with Craig, but with regard to his big book of miracles, Craig Keener is not an investigator. And I would like to have seen, if he's going to undertake this work, to partner with a private investigator, someone who is a professional at looking into things skeptically and digging it up. In fact, most of Craig Keener's work depends on testimonial report. Well, things go awry really, really fast there, and we can see it in some of that work. And so if Craig Keener's book, if you're going to kind of cite that as well, this is proof that miracles happen. And then all of you should be saying, instead of, I'm kind of skeptical of modern day miracles, you should be saying, oh no, modern day miracles are actually verified and proven. But I think that you realize too that Craig Keener's work cannot stand as that proof, because it simply was not done in a way that would satisfy skeptical investigation, and it could have been.
I brought Craig Keener up because I was actually interested in the skeptical view of it. I don't think it's knocked down. I think it's suggestive. It has some stronger cases, some weaker cases. I think that David Johnson's idea of teaming up with professional skeptic investigator would be a further step forward and a legitimate improvement to that. I still don't understand why Darren or Andrew said a formal investigation has to be calling it before the fact, but I may have misunderstood that demand. But
I'll answer it if I'm told I can. I don't want to
sorry,
derail it. But it was me, and I'm happy to answer it if it gets around to it.
Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead, someone else.
I've got 2 quick points that I'd like to make, which is, number one, I think it's very important from both the Christian and the skeptic perspective to understand what the Christians believe the purpose of miracles are for. And I don't think necessarily that all miracles, perhaps some, but not all miracles are done just to prove the existence of God. I don't think that's God's primary motivation for doing all miracles. God is not so interested in people knowing that he exists. He's interested in people coming into a loving relationship with him. So I can surely prove that Donald Trump exists, and not everyone is going to come into a loving relationship with him. So perhaps showing himself in a miraculous way and in some respects, shoving himself in the face of everyone is not going to accomplish his greater goal, which is bringing people into relationship. The other point is that I feel like we're almost kind of putting the cart before the horse here. We're trying to talk about the existence of miracles, but I mean, from a skeptic perspective, I don't blame you at all for not believing in miracles, because you don't believe in God. It's like, so how is that going to happen? So I don't think that any rationale that I give you is going to make any sense until we can go back and say, look, do you even think that the existence of God is possible? Because if God is possible, then miracles are possible. But if God is not possible, then I don't even believe in miracles if I don't believe in God. So
that seems narrow. You're foreclosing on the possibility of some other supernatural causation. And you're saying, well, we wouldn't believe in God. I don't know. Maybe we would, maybe we wouldn't. But we would definitely believe in a supernatural causation.
Okay.
And then we could go from there.
I won't speak for you.
Okay.
But I will. Maybe I'll just say the positive side of that, which is, if God is possible, then it seems rational to think that miracles are possible.
Right. But if miracles are possible, then God is possible. That you can work your way to God a lot easier if you can prove the things that you claim God did. That is not an inaccurate type of formulation. So I would be glad to see a miracle. And then I could say, well, something is hinky about the universe. There's something about the universe. I certainly don't know. Let's have a further conversation.
Isn't it the case that in order to believe that God exists, he has to do something to I'm not even suggesting a miracle, but you said that God's objective is to bring people into a loving relationship with him, right? Well, surely that entails a demonstration of concrete existence, whatever that would be.
Yeah, he's got to exist if you're going to love him. Yeah. Is that your point?
No, that's not my point. So in order to love him, it's not that he has to exist. It is that he has to demonstrate to me that he exists.
That's correct.
So, maybe there are fairies. Maybe the celestial teapot exists, right? And maybe some people believe in those, but without a demonstration of a fairy or the celestial teapot, then there is no sense in which I should believe in them. And the same thing would be true for a Jehovah or a Yahweh. That's what I'm saying.
I appreciate where you were going, and I just wanted to say those couple of theological things. In the Bible, we have signs and wonders, and so when you're saying, well, God doesn't do signs and wonders, what you're actually saying, well, he doesn't do signs and wonders anymore, because the Bible is full of that term, where it seems he did things just to get people to believe as the result. So I think that theologically your formulation is wrong, that what God wants to do is get us to love him. Well, that may be one of his goals, but he also did things to get people to believe, and you're missing that. And secondly, in the Bible, there were people who tested him, and he was okay with those tests. And so, it's convenient now to look at other parts of the Bible and say, well, okay, period of testing is closed.
Well, no, I think it's true that they did test him. It's not true that that was always the right thing to do. So just because God condescended to answer those tests doesn't mean that it's the right thing for us to do. I mean, I'm still going to go back.
It seems like it was sometimes the right thing to do because he actually encouraged the tests.
All right. Well,
so theologically speaking, that's a little bit inaccurate.
Okay, and maybe that's true in that time and place, but I'm still going to go back to what Jesus taught, which is you shall not put the Lord your God to the test. Am I supposed to disobey that?
I'm just putting out the other side because in these conversations where theology comes up, I find that few people are really theologians. I find that there are a lot of apologists who don't know theology very well. And so when listeners listen, I like to put out, look, I understand your book. I understand your theology. And there are some things that are being said that a greater conversation can be put around. So yes, I take your point. Jesus said that, but that can be interpreted in the light of other things that the Bible says to the contrary.
Yeah, on that same point, didn't Jesus also say, ask and you shall receive? So can you put that into the context of miracles?
Oh man, that's a hard one.
So let's give the Christians the last word here. We got time for one more question after this.
All right. It'll come from Brian, who is not here. Okay. Brian with a Y.
I'm just sitting back enjoying all this at this point. I've said my piece on miracles for the most part. So the theological side, as David said, yeah, there are some challenges there, and we certainly have to look at it in a whole. I think as Christians, we believe the Bible is a complete work of God, so we have to look at it in the context of the whole thing. So yeah, there are some tricky examples there theologically as to how we're supposed to look at this issue of miracles. But I think what we do see is that when miracles happen, God always has a purpose for it, and it usually communicates something about his nature or his goals. So I think we have to look at that as the same kind of context in the same way he's going to use miracles today. If he uses them, he's going to use it for his goals and purposes. So if our goal and purpose going into a study is to demonstrate God, it's going to be up to him as to whether he wants to answer that. So while we could do a study proactively, it doesn't necessarily mean that we're going to get any results that show it. Now, if we look at examples after the fact, do a great big investigation on it, we may find something again, but it's going to come down to what do you look at in these case studies? Do you believe these examples? Do you believe there's enough missing information here to cast doubt on this account? Or do you believe there's enough information here to say with great probability this was a miracle that occurred?
I'll leave it there.
Before I ask Brian's question,
Charles,
I need to ask
hold on one second. Charles, you got anything to add on that last piece?
Well, maybe just one point back to David J. The idea between God exists and miracles are possible. I think you said something like that miracles could prove God's existence. And I think that for individuals, miracles would only prove God's existence to someone who thinks that God's possible. So if you don't think God is even possible, even if you were to experience a miracle, I think somehow you just justify that off as some material explanation. Be like,
no,
well, yeah, I saw stars in the sky, but I'm probably seeing things. Maybe I need to go see a psychiatrist.
What I said. Okay. I did say that could be a gateway to God existing, but what I mostly said was if you can prove that miracles exist, that would show me the supernatural exists, that there's something more to this universe. There's something hinky going on. We're not talking about physics at that point. We're talking about something else. Now, maybe a demonstration of miracles would prove that Zeus exists. And in that case, you wouldn't want to prove that miracles exist. Maybe it would show me that, some other form of non-material, non-corporeal being exists. And so you're just kind of discounting that. You're insisting that I must have the miracle point to God. And I'm saying, no, you don't have to do that. And so if you got the goods, show me the goods and let me follow that from there.
Yeah. So the only problem I have with that is you say if I can prove that the miracle exists, and I think that's where you and I are kind of disagreeing. I'm not sure that anything to you could prove that miracle exists, because I think that you are cognitively closed to that possibility. I mean, you could say, look, if something X, Y, and Z happens, but okay, so maybe there's.
It seems like it's not worth it for you.
That seems very ad hominem.
Yeah, it's not worth it to you to prove it to me if I'm not going to agree in advance that I will believe in your God, and it could be that I will believe in a Hindu God, and so you want to get a kind of an agreement up front that I'm going to agree with your God before you show me that a miracle exists. Otherwise, it's not worth it.
Okay,
and I think that's the closed view here. I'm asking for the miracle. Show me something I can believe. I'll believe it. I don't know how I will interpret it.
Sure,
I don't know what that will, right? But I should have the opportunity to interpret it in some way. But you're going to foreclose on that possibility because I'm not going to raise my hand and say,
yeah, let's let Charles respond, and then you can ask the next question, David.
Yeah, so I see where you're going, which is if I could prove to you that a miracle exists, it would not necessarily lead to a Christian God. Is that what your point is? Yeah, okay. And fair enough. I think you're philosophically absolutely correct in that point. But I think if I could, so to speak, prove that a miracle happened to you, then you'd have to admit that there was at least more than materialism, whatever that might be.
I have no problem with that.
Okay, fair enough. Okay, but if you're I misstated it, but my point is, if you're closed to the possibility of there being something besides materialism, it's going to be very difficult to prove that a miracle exists. And then I don't even like that word "prove" because it carries, I think, an undue realistic objectives. Like, can't we just say, why does it have to be like 100%? Why can't we demonstrate that it seems more likely miraculous than not to be rationally believing in that it was a miracle until
we've tried that many times, and your answer is, the answer is not that we skeptics won't try to go down that road. We do, but when Christians do kind of lay out the evidence for a particular miracle, and we point out places where there are holes in the story, you're saying what we get is, well, you're just close to the possibility, and what we say is, well, you're just trying to prove God, and you're letting your skeptical investigation be solved. And so that's kind of where the problem is.
Fair enough.
Yeah, and to leave that on the cutting floor, anything else on the cutting floor? Is that everything you guys wanted to say on this? Charles, was that the end there?
Well, I'd be happy to say that if we could agree whatever the standard is, it's not going to be 100%. If it was like 51%, whatever that meant, then I'd probably be happy to leave it there.
All right. Now, Brian's question, David, that's the last one.
He asked 3. One is inflammatory. 2 would take too long to unpack.
So exciting.
So I'm going to. Well, we can't have any inflammatory questions on this show. So I'm gonna go with, can you disagree with God? And the follow-up, what do you disagree with if you can disagree with God? And if you can't, would you if he allowed you to? So this
what do you mean by disagree?
That's great.
Yeah. So I think what he means, and so I'm speaking for him and thus taking over the question a little bit if it's not what he means. God says something like, in this period of time, the law is that homosexuals are an abomination and they should be put to death. Agree or disagree? Well, the Christian kind of has to come up with a way of saying, well, I agree. At that time, that was the right thing. Most skeptics would say, no, that's monstrous at any time for any people. And so I would disagree with God's judgment. Is it okay to disagree with God? Is the question. I'm just using that as an example. That is not necessarily Brian's subtext, but that's the best way that I can explain it.
Okay, so leaving the example aside, if the question is it okay to disagree with God, just abstractly as a question standing out there, no. If God is omniscient and correct, I'm not. So there are times when I have disagreed with what I think God says. That's a different question, but it's not okay.
Why would you believe he's omniscient and correct? Because that wasn't really a part of the question. Where do you get that idea?
The way the question was stated is it okay to agree with God? So
right, but even if you believe that God exists, I can tell you, I've talked to Christians who don't believe that He's omniscient.
Okay.
So there are.
They'd answer
if you're.
Yeah, sure. You're right. I did presume a more classical or historic Orthodox biblical view. So I won't, at this point, back up to defend that. But I am just presuming that view of God when the question is asked. It's probably the classical view of God. But maybe the questioner had a different view of God in mind. I'm not sure which view to answer.
We get all kinds of views on the board, and I've had all kinds of guests that have, trust me, would not go with that classical view. And so,
fair enough.
If your assumption is God is right in all of his, is infinitely correct, then I understand why you would say, no, you couldn't disagree with him. So that may be just a part of the subtext that you have to accept with this question.
Under the classical view, I think the question reduces to, is it right to be wrong? Logically, it would reduce to that. And, yeah.
Yeah, I wouldn't have a problem disagreeing with Thor, but I do think it would be wrong to disagree with an omniscient God. And my personal belief is that God is omniscient. So, in my view, yes, it would. Is it
okay to follow up then with this question that is proving to be too easy by saying, can you just give a 1 or 2 sentence?
No, I want to answer. That's it. It's easy, and then we're.
Yeah, because this is the last question, but we gotta let Caleb. What do you think on this question, real quick?
Yeah, and if you don't mind adding a 1 or 2 sentence to, if you take, well, it's a classical God, why do you assume that God is omniscient? I mean, can you unpack that at least a little bit for the people listening to the show? That's an assumption that the Christians on this panel seem to be making. So maybe we can get underneath that assumption. And I will not push back on that assumption. I just want to know where you get it from, because even Christians who believe that may come at that assumption differently. And I'm guessing a lot of people believe it because that's what they think the Bible says. And if that's the answer, great, that's the answer. But if there's something more interesting there, I'd love to hear it.
More interesting.
Right. So, it is my view that God is omniscient as well as omnipresent. It's the only, and Kevin could answer this far more eloquently than I can. But from my philosophical understanding of looking at what kind of being could create a universe, what is consistent with the universe we have, the only view I see that consistently holds up is a God that is omnipresent, omnipowerful, and omniscient. So I see God as a all-powerful being. And if that's the case, if an omnipresent, omnipowerful God were to tell us that, we've got to sacrifice people for the sun to come up every day, then that would be the correct thing to do. If this being is the ultimate power, justice, love within the universe, and I do believe that that's how God is, so I believe that his view is going to be correct whether or not my view is.
Yeah.
All right. Go ahead, Charles.
Yeah, I was just going to tag on there. So I think when we talk about disagreement, it sounds like we're not really talking about things like math or, the state of atoms. It seems like it has like a moral hint to it, especially since the example given was, say, homosexuality in the Old Testament. So if we're talking about disagreeing with God in a moral context, there seems to be a deeper question is there such a thing as objective moral values? And if there are, then those, in our view, can only come into existence if there is a moral lawgiver. And so how can you morally disagree with the one who gives the moral law? I think by definition, then you would be wrong. If there is no objective moral values and duties, then what are we even talking about?
I don't think it's too hard to create fertile ground for disagreement there, though, even with a moral lawgiver.
Okay.
Here's why. If the Bible is the ground upon which you think that a moral lawgiver gave objective moral laws,
it's not.
It is but whatever the ground is, if it's the case that some fallible beings can find ambiguity in that moral law, in other words, if there's not a clear way for us to all agree on what the objective outcomes should be, then we have reasonable grounds to disagree with that objective lawgiver, whether the laws were objective or not. They should be so objective that there should not be fertile ground for disagreement, and that is not what we have.
Well, that's the difference between.
Can I ask a clarifying question? Are we talking about disagreeing intentionally with God or accidentally? Because I'll certainly get
that's
things
a fair question
about all the time. I think that's a huge difference.
I'm pretty sure the question is intentionally. God says something, and you think about it and say, "No, I don't think that's right."
That is, to put it another way, I know you are saying this, God. I fully believe that God intends this to be what God is saying. And I intentionally think that God is wrong.
Right. So that penetrates the veil of hiddenness, though, right? Because one of the problems that we have with the claim of an objective lawgiver is the fact that there is an acknowledgement, maybe not by all of you, but in Christendom generally, there seems to be an acknowledgement of the hiddenness of God. And so hiddenness creates a problem for this very conversation.
All right. Yeah, I see your point. I agree with that. I'm trying to connect it back to the proxy question that was asked.
Sure, I don't want to derail that either. There's a hiddenness issue for claiming objective law.
Yeah, that's worthy of discussion. But I'm just saying, I think when it's a hiddenness issue, let's say the believer, whatever that is grasping to get it right, by which they mean, what do you really want, God? I want to agree with you. So in relation back to the original proxy question, I think that would still not be the believer saying it's okay to disagree with God. I think, if I understand the conversation right.
Sure.
I think that's right. Russell, are we going to get an opportunity at brief closing statements?
Yes, you could start.
Good. Actually, I'm going to pass my start to Matthew because he's been sitting there thinking that he's invisible. And as Drax on the Guardians of the Galaxy.
That's how the special relationship works. I only appear when you call on me.
If he stood still long enough, he would become invisible. And I just want to say, I want to declare on this podcast, I've been seeing you the whole time, Matthew. It does not work. So you get to go first.
Just a thought on I'll stick to the last question because, time and all that. I'm at that time of life where I'm the parent of a teenage girl. Now,
me too.
And
I feel your pain.
Because I'm the parent, I'm always right. And my house, my rules.
Wow.
Kind of thing. Now,
spoken like a true guy.
Regardless of me being right, my daughter will still argue back to me. Sometimes quite vocally. And to be quite honest, I think that's a much healthier relationship. I would much rather have a daughter that argued back at me and had her own mind than a daughter who just accepted everything that I said. So that's my analogy to the conversation that we've just had, and that's my closing statement.
And you know what? I do want to say, Matthew, that I hear you on that. And I think that's why Jesus said David was after his own heart. So, but anyways, who do we got next, David?
First of all, do you Christians want to participate in the closing statement?
Christians, wow!
Those people
degraded to them and us.
Honestly, it's not really a question. We do closing statements on this show. So
honestly, my closing statement here is a little off topic from the discussion we've been having. It is that I think this kind of thing is exactly what we should be seeing among skeptics, among believers, especially among Christians. We don't see enough of these kind of conversations where we discuss important issues like this, and we get down to the nuts and bolts of the argument. We can agree to disagree on many points, but we should be looking to explore truth. We should be looking at evidence, and we should be able to disagree in a way that is respectable, and I think everybody today has demonstrated this. We've had some fun, we've had good conversations, and we've gotten down to some important issues, and we've left people with things to further explore. There were a lot of name drops, a lot of references for other places to go check out and go dig into. And, with our group Question Christianity, that's really what we aim to do. We are not experts on everything we talk about. We try and give people reasonable answers, and we try and point people towards resources where they can dig in for deeper answers. So that's my closing statement, is I think if anybody takes anything away from that, go out and have a conversation like this with somebody you disagree with. And that's a great place to start.
Thanks so much. Darren.
It was an interesting conversation. I know for me, I didn't really get a lot of satisfactory answers from the questions we presented. I spent probably a year looking into NDEs and out-of-body experiences, bought the books, tried to have them, all that good stuff. And it seemed like to me that none of the stories ever held up to close scrutiny, which is why I generally don't accept NDEs as evidence. They just need more rigor before they can be presented as evidence, as far as I can tell. In the future, I think I would love to have I would love to chat with these guys either online or offline. There's a lot I think we could cover. For example, they kept talking about the plausibility and possibility of God and miracles and such. And as far as I can tell, the plausibility and possibility of a God or the supernatural is zero. So I would love to talk with them and see how they come up with their numbers. What is exactly the probability of a supernatural event happening? I would love to see those numbers. I'd love to see the work, and I would love to see how they come to that conclusion. That's me.
Charles?
I'm going to be very honest with you guys. I was very intimidated to come on the show. I think whatever else might be said, I'd say from the skeptical side, you guys brought great questions, had great rebuttals. It's been at the very least, it's been a very engaging conversation, and you certainly kept us on our toes. I'm also not I'm like what I consider a $1 apologist. I'm not a $1 million apologist. I'm a $1 apologist. I definitely have a passion for it, but I don't at all have all the answers. But there again, I don't know that I could summarize it any better than what Caleb said. The most valuable thing that happened here is that we were both willing to listen to each other's side and have productive or not, to at least have the conversation and at least give each other an ear. And I fear that in this day and age that hopefully that's not coming to a close. That from the Christian side, I think that skeptics should always be given a voice. You should always be able to raise questions and hard questions and at least have someone who's willing to give you an answer. And I hope that the other side is at least true. I feel that's what's happened here. You guys are at least willing to talk and listen to us. So I thank you for that. And I really appreciate this opportunity.
Thank you. Andrew.
Want to echo the sentiment that this was a very engaging show. Sometimes you get this many people together, and it's hard for 8 people to share a mic. And I'll simply say that this was a great combination, and I hope we get to do it again. And to that extent, if we do it again, we probably have some housekeeping to do ahead of time, right? To figure out how to limit the questions, maybe pick the most interesting ones, do a better job of handing off the mic. I think, to be quite frank, the skeptics did a poor job of that today, including myself. So thank you guys for being patient. To move on to the balance of the questions and answers, for me, the big issue can be summarized in the first couple of questions and the question on miracles. I don't know, was there a question in between us? We asked about a non-material realm where there were some laws, some things that we could reasonably judge to be there, and how to assess what it was at the beginning. I didn't get a clear answer for that. I didn't get a sense that it was coherent to suggest that there was a non-physical place that we could reasonably decide what the system of rules there was and how it might interact with us. And that progressed into the miracle conversation. I think we asked some pretty reasonable questions about miracles, and largely what we got was what we always get. Well, God's working in a foreign country, or God won't be put to the test. whatever the accumulation of the answer was, it was, well, sorry, skeptics, but the power of God is not open to you. And that should be concerning to everybody listening. I do want to say thank you, and feel free to push back on my close. I have absolutely no problem with answers to my objections by the rest of you, but thank each of you, and I hope we get to do it again. I really do. I thought this was a blast.
All right, Kevin?
Yeah, I'm like Charles. I was really intimidated at the notion of coming on the show. I've never been on a show like this. I appreciate even the pushback, especially the challenges, because again, honestly, I felt frustrated with myself about not having enough details on recall, like some of you guys have and can quickly go to the details. Hopefully we will get another opportunity to speak further, and it gave me a lot to reflect on. I think as an overall takeaway for me, as far as the concepts involved, I'm still wondering about this assumption that we can reduce everything to physical phenomena, all of human experience. The idea of testing miracles, reasonable, but that's sort of a haunting quote. I think it was Andrew left. That makes the skeptic feel like the power of God is not open or available to me. Makes wow. My first thought is, there's more to the power of God than outward spectacular healings or something like that. And I think the power of God is open in other ways to all of us. But this is not the best closing statement, because it's just turning into raising more questions. So thank you all. I learned a lot. I learned a lot of things that I need to learn more about. That's very helpful to me, seriously. So thank you.
Thank you, Kevin.
All right, Johnson.
Perfectly acceptable closing statement. So all of you who are talking about your nervousness, get over it. You know what? The worst thing that can happen is you show up less prepared than you think, and you end up looking stupid. We skeptics have been doing that for a long time. It gets easier the more you do it. So don't worry about that. You're fine. I tend to sweat all the way through a podcast. So what are you going to do? I want to pick up on Andrew's thought and curse him, damn you, for taking some of my closing thought thunder.
That will not be the last time you say that to me, sir.
Hey, it probably won't be the last time I say it on this podcast. So I think one of the biggest problems that Christians face today is this broader category of thing called the hiddenness of God. So that's been talked about a little bit. And so I will just pivot right now and move to a different thought that's similar, which is the fairness aspect, the justice aspect. I understand the impulse of the theologian to say, well, God doesn't work that way. You can't just, he's not a genie in a bottle. You can't just snap your fingers and have him do stuff. And yet we look at something like Keener's Big Book of Miracles, which is story after story in many cases of Christian saying, okay, God, I need you to grow this person's finger back. And God was happy to do it then. So it does work that way then. It works that way every time a Christian talks about a miracle that somebody did. Oh, I had cancer and had brain cancer. Half my head was falling off. And with the other half, I prayed and woke up the next morning, the whole head was there. Well, it turns out God does work that way. But he doesn't work that way for anyone who's looking. And so if God does work that way for some people, then I find it completely unfair that it doesn't work that way for me. He says, well, what God wants is a lasting relationship. But, we've had Christians, many Christians, hundreds of Christians. I've heard their stories of how, they walked through this valley of doubt and they prayed to God and they cried out to God, and God reached out and he touched their heart and he showed them some great thing. And, oh, I felt Jesus and I was returned. Well, guess what? I was a Christian for 40 years and I walked through a valley of doubt for a lot of that. And I prayed and I asked, and I fell on my face, and I built altars, God damn it, altars, whatever it took. And God didn't do that for me. Don't tell me that God doesn't work that way. We've got all kinds of Christian testimonials that God works exactly that way. But when it comes to me, oh no, God doesn't work that way. Screw that. I have no respect for that whatsoever. What you're trying to say is that my God isn't falsifiable, but you've got too many testimonial stories on your side that says, oh yes, he is. But what it says is he's not for you. And what the Christian argument seems to be is if you believe in God first with all your heart, then he'll show himself to you. Well, screw that too. I find it most unfair if God would allow me to go through this life and not show himself in a way that I could believe. But he's done that for thousands of other people where he showed himself in a way that they could believe. I don't buy that. I don't buy that. It's not right. So not only is he hidden when someone comes around with a microscope to look, but he also seems pretty capricious in who he wants and who he doesn't want. If he doesn't want me,
Is that your close, my friend? you wanted to end it with that mic drop. Okay, I got you. Well, everybody had to be the me at some point. So my closing statement, we just heard from Questioning Christianity. This is the podcast that everybody should listen to if they want to hear more about them. So my closing statement is going to have to just basically do with telling you guys that I hope I moderated it okay. I do promise if we do this again, I will format it a little different. I did enjoy the conversation on both sides here. You guys put some great questions to the floor there, and unfortunately, you can't answer every one of them, and you have to leave some on the cutting floor. We've just went 2 hours, guys, and we still haven't even dug in to the hard stuff yet. And I appreciate each and every one of you. And you know what? If you guys agree, I would love to host you again, and we will do it the opposite way. You guys can question and grill the atheists next time. You already got your paws bloody here, so you know how it goes. This is it. This is what Skeptics and Seekers does. And with that, I am David. Do we have anything else coming up that
I keep promising the comment show? I promise it after every podcast. It's going to happen eventually. I think it's probably going to happen after this. I still haven't gotten in touch with Brian, but by the time you hear this, I am pretty sure that I will have a hard agreement that a comment show is going to come the following week. So stay tuned for that, everybody. And when we do the next show, I'm happy to reconvene once a month until we get this out of our systems. So we've already got another round of questions that we can ask 2 more rounds. So let us know in the comments what you think, folks. You can reach us at skepticsandseekers.squarespace.com. Go there, just find the latest show, sign into your Discuss account, and join the conversation. If you'd like to ask me something in private, then you can send me an email at skepticsandseekers@gmail.com, and we'll have an exchange there. If you want to be on the show, and you have even less experience than these guys, drop me a line, skepticsandseekers@gmail.com. You're already on. I approve. We'll just work out the schedule. Come on, I love talking to real people about real things that matter to you. So
does Questioning Christianity have a website and ways they can get a hold of?
Yeah. Caleb, why don't you just throw us a bone there?
Yeah, so check out Question Christianity on Facebook or on YouTube. We do live shows every 2 weeks, lots of listener interaction. So you can check us out on Facebook and YouTube, Question Christianity.
All right. Well, that's the end, gentlemen. Everybody have a good one.
You have been listening to a podcast from Reason Press. Do you have any thoughts on what you've just heard? Do you have a topic that you would like us to cover? Please send all feedback to reasonpress@gmail.com. You might even appear on an episode. Our theme music was written for us by Holly. To hear more of her music, see the links in our show notes.